Don't worry, every child develops at their own pace and they eventually figure it out. I wouldn't even give it a second thought. You've got this. You're just there to make sure that they don't really seriously injure themselves. Ha! No, milestones matter. Your child matters, and what you do each and every day matters. So let's take a look at what are milestones, typical, healthy, average milestones for that 1-year-old.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started.
So we do need to be somewhat cautious that when we talk about milestones at that 1-year mark or that 2-year mark or that 3-year-old mark, they're all toddlers, right? That we give them a little wiggle room. So when we take a look at child development, we have to be very cautious about putting absolutes and to think that this is exactly what a 1-year-old does, this is what a 2-year-old does, and this is what a 3-year-old. There's a lot of wiggle room, but we have to keep in mind that kids have a very specific hierarchy in development. It's just the timing seems to be a little fluid. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have certain skills. It just means that they're not going to have the 100 specific skills that we talk about. Not every single one will be ticked off. And so when I look at milestones, when I look at developmental milestones, let's say between the 9th month and the 15th month, I give that 3-month window on both ends of that 12-month, that first birthday, because there is that kind of fluid or ebb and flow of development. So please keep that in mind. But there are still some very, very specific developmental markers that we as specialists take a look at. And I want to share these kind of backroom information pieces to you, mom, dad, and grandparents, so then you can be in charge and you can really understand what your child is striving for and how can you set up your environment each and everyday things when you eat together and wash together and play together and sing together. All of these are opportunities to help shape these milestones and keep him or her on track. So let's look at that window between 9 months and 15 months. Right in the middle, if you think of the bell curve, that would be that first birthday. And so I really look at, especially those first 3 to 5 years, as kind of this miraculous period in a human being's life, because they go from when they're 8 or 9 months old, pretty much just this stationary baby who is beginning to share his or her personality, beginning to really engage with the outside world with purpose, but they're still pretty stationary. They're just beginning to really find their voice and babble ba 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 or ga ga ga. But then to 15 months, in that 6-month mark, they're this sure-footed, fast-moving, communicative, little being with a strong personality, and they really do begin to understand a lot of what you do with them during those everyday activities. It's that 6-month period is really dynamic, and once the momentum starts going, you want to keep them on that track and not hold them back, but at the same time, give them that wiggle room, give them that autonomy to wire from the inside out. And we talk a lot about wiring the brain, and then the brain is the machinery behind what they do communicatively and physically, emotionally, cognitively. And so it's all about giving them the opportunity to explore and wire, but we're giving them the boundaries. And that's what milestones are. They're the developmental boundary markers. And so as we move through these 6 different areas that I'm going to talk about: social emotional development or milestones, language and communication, brain development, movement and physical, food and nutrition, and then what are some things to look out for at the end of this period? So you're not expecting everything to be developed right at that first birthday. There's going to be this ebb and flow. And that's what we look for, not necessarily the average, but enough development on track in a sequential pattern, because that's how I often give the metaphor of building a house. If we do it and there's poor drainage, or we do it and we didn't really level the ground, then it becomes very unstable. And we don't know. It might take, a couple of years to start to crumble, and you'll see the cracks on the wall, or it might take, a decade. And that's the same as with really young child development, your child. Let's look at social emotional for that 1-year-old. Again, think of the bell curve. So that first birthday is right there in the middle, and we're going to do 9 months to 15 months. One of the major things that we're looking for is that your little one is truly learning to connect with the people in his or her life. And I've talked a lot about this, that these are the prerequisites to verbal communication. It's the nonverbal, right? It's really connecting through the physical interactions, and the voice then will follow. So you want your little one to hand you a book, and that's the gesture saying, hey, I want to share this with you. Will you please engage with me? He will cry when you leave the room, and he knows that there's going to be now a time difference, and he's really, really connected emotionally, that he knows that you're the most important person in their lives. And so there's that little anxiety of separation. Because he's more cognitively aware that there's more people in his life than just that immediate gratification when he was 3 or 4 months old, and all he really wanted to do was feel comfortable and love and safe, and then well fed, right? And so, but now his world at 9, 10, 12 months of age is really expanding, and he realizes that it's more than just the immediate moment. And the flip side to that is that then your 1-year-old, give or take a few months, will then become more and more shy with strangers, much more apprehensive and uncertain. Again, because his cognitive awareness is bigger than just that immediate gratification. He'll also begin to understand what's happening when you're dressing or washing. He'll reach and give you a hand when you're trying to put his clothes on, or that he will try to assist you understanding what that process is. And again, if you think back when he was 3 or 4 months, he's still just beginning to realize that his hand is attached to his body and he has some control over it. But at 12 months, he's really beginning to understand his independence and how his physical world, or how he can interface with his physical world on purpose. And so he's going to want to help you. And that's that big thing with the toddlers, always want to do what we're doing, and they always want to be in the middle of it. And I know that's the stressful part of it, but that is telling us that his social emotional development is maturing. He will then begin to have some favorite toys, being able to be connected to things more closely on some level and less closely, that he's beginning to differentiate things in his world. That when I look at kids who might be developmentally delayed, they don't differentiate. So you want that 1-year-old to be developing emotional connection to people and things that mean something to them, whether it's their favorite foods or their favorite toys. And then the auditory skills are mature enough that he or she is really beginning to repeat things that he hears in play situation, but then he uses that as a form of communication to get your attention because he knows that you're going to respond based on his voice. And so that you're important to him and that you can help him. So some of the tips for that social emotional development would be to play a lot of social games. And we do those in those first 3 to 6 months, playing, peekaboo, patty cake. You're even sorting some clothes in laundry. And so you could say, oh, here, go put this in the hamper, put it in that hamper right over there, and he'll go and do it. Because again, he's building this relationship with you. He realizes that you're doing things in this environment and he wants to be a part of it. That's that emotional connection. And that he can begin to really dump things and fill things. And so he wants to be working with you. And it's that social emotional connection that you're looking for. And help him be engaged with you. So you're doing laundry and pick him up on the wash machine and say, here, dump the powder in or shut the lid. Even if he does 1 or 2 steps, he's in it with you, and that's emotionally connecting him and you and the task. And then encourage him more and more often to help you get dressed, to help you wash his hands, to help you brush his teeth. So he or she might be doing little bits and pieces of it, but you're building their attention. You're building that joint attention and joint task. And that's building that emotional connection and also giving him a little hit with dopamine and serotonin, like, oh, that felt good. To do something with another person. And if you have an older child, get them both to join in with you. And it doesn't mean from the beginning to the end of a task. He's just helping you with a little tidbit here and a little tidbit there. But that social emotional for that 1-year-old, he's really broadening his horizon and he's a little less self-absorbed. He's still pretty self-absorbed, but he's realizing that he has to share space with these other people and that you matter. And he wants to feel connected with you. So that's one of the major keys, that social emotional awareness and connection with other people. The next section would be language and communication. I think that language and communication really bleeds into all of these other areas. Like I've said before, we can't truly compartmentalize these areas, that they have to be respected no matter what you're doing, whether you're washing your hands or getting in and out of the car. There's that connection, right? Give me your arm so you can put it through the strap, or put both hands under the water so you can rinse. So you're using verbal communication, but you're also doing it together. So how your toddler begins to express himself is critical. Laying that foundation for those first 12 months is huge. And I've talked a lot about the physical component of talking and building the motor strength and coordination, but also the top down, that cognitive piece. And so remember, when we all communicate, and as I'm sitting here talking to you both the auditory and the visual, I'm using a lot of hand gestures, and it's pretty darn hard for any human to talk without some hand gestures. And if we do, then you and I as the listener might look at them and say, they're kind of robotic, right? There's not a lot of oomph to it. There's not a lot of humanness to it. And so the hand gestures, the nonverbal communication, as well as, what else is going on in my voice besides the single words that I'm using, but the pitch, the tone, the volume, all of these components to it, nonverbal components, really matter too. And he is learning the difference to interpret your communication based on those nonverbal elements. And so he's going to start to practice and play around with those. So using basic gestures like waving, right? Or even some basic words at one, kids from 1 word to 10 words, give or take, other than mama or dada or papa. Those phoning patterns are more or less our vocal play, but by 1, they definitely have attached that you are the mama and you are the dada, and he can differentiate that. And so now he's using it as your title to call you or to seek reinforcement from you. By that 12th month, their babbles are much more long and differentiated. And that's critical. That's what you want to look at. Some parents will say, oh yeah, they have a handful of words. It's not so much the words, and that is important. And I, as a speech pathologist, take a look at that. But I want to make sure that they're noisy, that they're showing me a lot of different sounds, that motor planning is emerging. And so we're looking at sounds like the p, b. Those are the lip sounds, right? And those are the easy ones for him or her to look at you and to try to match. And then we have the t, d, where the tip of the tongue goes up. And you'll see that, and I've shared this before in other podcasts and other videos, that there's voiced and voiceless. And so we can say p, 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 p. The P is voiceless. But once I turn, I do the same motor planning, bring my lips together, build up air pressure behind my lips, but I have my voice turned on. B, b, b. That's the B. And so there's a lot of physical play, vocal play, and social play going on. But you want a lot, by that first birthday, you want a lot of differentiated sounds that they're playing around with. They're trying to organize in a sequential pattern. They've heard it thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and they're trying to put it together in real time. Like to say, doggy or bally or baby or cup or mama with purpose, right? And so they're also beginning to respond to very simple requests or comment. So give me your hand, or give me your cup. Or if you're sitting there sharing a meal with them, can mama have a bite? And they're looking at their piece of bread or something. Can mama have a bite? And they know how to begin to share that with you based on your words that you're using, but also the gestures when you lean in and when you're like, ooh, he knows the context. I'm having a meal with my mama and we're going to help each other. And again, that's building that social emotional connection too, that I've talked a lot about here, that mealtime is much more than just nutrition, which is like 1,000% important. It's also building that social, emotional, language-based opportunity to learn. Let's see, that she will repeat words that you say. They could be new words that they haven't heard before that they think, that sounds kind of fun. Or they could be words that bring up a memory. Like if you say, oh, let's go look for your bunny, They know, oh, bunny, yeah, I know what a bunny is. Bunny's my favorite toy. Or maybe you have a pet bunny, or simple books that they've heard over and over and over again. They're going to really start to pick up. And that's what you want around that first birthday. Again, some kids are going to be 10 months. Some kids are going to be 14 months, but you want your kid noisy, and you want a lot of differentiated sounds and a lot of different babbling going on. And the more they practice, then the more they're going to be able to sequence those practices and string them into real words. Words like book, water, bunny, bed, wash, berry, yummy, kiss, more, up, jump, car, door, all of these things that they've heard thousands of times. And now that they're really engaging with their three-dimensional world and their routines each and every day, they're able to put it all together. I can hear it, I can say it, and I can do it. And it's really, really exciting and very explosive. If we take a look at their first birthday to their third birthday, they go from, a handful of words, maybe 10, give or take, some 20 or 50, all the way to 1,000 by their third birthday. And again, some kids will be 2,000 or 3,000, but we have to have some solid verbal communication. And on average, a child will learn 9 to 10 new words a day. So that's pretty remarkable. And if you do the math, you can go from, a handful of words to 1,000 words, or, 20 words to 2,000 words. And it's really remarkable of how they're wiring, their understanding, their social, emotional connection, and their language. Some tips that you all can keep in your forebrain, some that you're probably already doing, but I like to reiterate here because that's important. So always encourage your toddler to greet people, to say hello or goodbye. And it's not that you force them to. You say, oh, say hello to Aunt Susie. And if they shy away, and then you model, oh, hi, Aunt Susie. But you're giving them that prompt in the beginning that's what that social language is all about, right? Or you can just wave, oh, let's wave. Hi, Aunt Susie, or hi, Joey. And then you praise your toddler when they do. And so they get that human connection. You say, oh, you're a good greeter, but you praise them for their effort, right? And you can, if they're not going to speak, say they're a little uncomfortable, then you say, just give them a wave, just wave, just hello, you give them a wave. And again, modeling, encouraging positively. And then when they do begin to verbalize, and then you say, oh yeah, that's great talking. Let's do it again. Hi, Aunt Susie. Hi, Aunt Susie. And it's going to be this dance, this ebb and flow. Again, not forcing them or not shaming them, but you have to nudge them. Right? You have to show them. And some kids will pick it up automatically and won't need a lot of nudging. But if you're making it lighthearted and if you're making it natural, then they will follow along. And then you will prompt them to point to characters or objects when you're sharing in a book. And the whole thing is you're talking to them a lot, you're reading with them a lot, you're singing with them a lot, you're engaging both verbally and gesturally, right? And you're modeling all of this, not just the verbal communication. But now that you're sharing a book with them, then you can bring their attention to the book and say, I wonder where the apple tree is. Where's the apple tree? And you want them to look at it. You can follow their gaze. And if they're not really pointing yet, help them. Take their hand and, oh, let's point together. Give me your pointing finger. You can wrap your hand around it, around their little fist and say, oh, point, point, point. Hi, apple tree. And you wave to the apple tree or the bunny rabbit or the cow or whatever the book is. So the choo-choo train, right? But the whole idea is that you're giving them a lot of modeling because they're right on the verge of this verbal explosion from a handful of words to 1,000 words. And you want to give them opportunity after opportunity throughout your entire day, from everyday tasks that you're doing to the people that you meet and greet in the grocery store or in the library or wherever you all go. But it's really about talking with them, singing with them, reading with them, and talking some more. But that 1-year-old mark, you want to make sure that they're noisy. Well, you really want to make sure that your 8, 10, 12-month-old are noisy, but that by their first birthday, they're really having a lot of different sounds coming out of their mouth and they're playing with it. Okay, so the next developmental milestone is really looking at brain development. And when we talk about brain development, we're talking about higher order thinking, that we're wiring the brain through our connection, our human connection, and their physical experience. Okay, so what brain development then looks at is how your baby's brain is wiring itself, how it's continuing to grow and shape and build connections. So one way you can tell is that he's copying or following your lead, that he's looking at your movements and looking at your gestures. And that's why 16 gestures by 16 months is critical as a precursor to verbal communication, as a precursor to social engagement, right? That he can wave hello or goodbye or blow you a kiss or shrug your shoulders, right? That he's copying you is critical to understanding how he is going to learn more, right? And he knows that you're his first teacher, not on a conscious level, but he knows that you are important. The adults are important, or older brothers and sisters are important. I'm going to follow your lead, and I'm getting that. That again, it's not just about survival anymore. It's about making me feel good when I join in these activities with mama or dada or older brother or sister. Now, we can also tell that brain is growing and brain is developing when they can bang two things together. That's what we call bilateral at the midline, right? So the right side of the body and the left side of the body are working together. And you start to see that when they begin to hold their own bottle or begin to bring things to their mouth. But you want the right side and the left side to work together and bring it to the midline. And so you know that the brain is wiring based on his umpteen hours of tummy time, his umpteen hours of crawling. By his first birthday, he should be taking those first couple of steps, but that he's really working his body, and his right hemisphere and his left hemisphere are talking together through that midline, which is the corpus callosum, and that he's able to move his limbs, his upper limbs and his lower limbs in unison and with purpose. Other milestones is that he drinks from a cup and that he uses objects correctly. Not always. We want that imaginary play, right? So we want him to take a remote and pretend it's a phone. But we also want him to know that a kid's spoon is used for eating, right? And for stirring. And you can use it as a pointer, but it's really not going to be used to color or to draw with, right? A spoon is for eating. Yes, they're going to continue to taste things and put things that are inappropriate in their mouth, but they're still learning, and they have wired their brain enough and they're understanding that these things over here are food and I'm going to eat them. And these things, I don't know all the foods in the world yet, right? So I'm still going to differentiate a few things over here. But drinking from a cup can be introduced in early feeding or in baby-led feeding at 6 and 7 months of age for sure. And even 5 months of age. Drinking from a cup is a heck of a lot easier than most parents understand, and even most therapists, honestly, and understand why sippy cups are very, very unhealthy for all of our children. And that's learning how to drink from an open cup is very teachable and very natural to our babies at a very young age, at 6, 7, and 8 months. But by their 12th month, by their first birthday, they should be able to hold that open cup and be able to sip. And that tells us a lot about stability in the body, using one hand. He might use it with two hands too, but that then the lips are coming together. He's not shoving it in his mouth to get stability in the jaw, that the lips are protruding. They can have enough seal to the rim of the cup so then he can take a sip. And all of that development should have been emerging over those last 6 months, right? The second half of that first year. Let's see. He also, by 12 months of age, will find things that are hidden. What that tells us is that object permanence is present, that he knows that just because he can't see it, that he can pull it out of his memory and his organization, and he can go looking for something, right? That, again, is a precursor to higher order language development, because words are representation, and we can talk about things that aren't present. And so that's really important, that he or she really begins to understand that just because it's not visually present, that it doesn't exist anymore, or that it's out of my memory. And that he looks at the right object when it's named, whether it's in a book or if you're just playing and you have a dozen of toys out or whatnot, that you can say, I wonder where the giraffe is. Can you find the giraffe for mama? Giraffe. And he'll go looking for it, right? Or when you're looking at a book and you turn the page and you start talking about the little girl who fell off the slide, right? And where's the slide? And he'll look at it, right? So again, there's that timing with your words and the meaning of the words and his language ability to understand that it's related to whatever activity you're doing. And then, can he follow some simple directions? Like I mentioned before, that he's really, helping you get dressed, or he's helping you do some laundry, like close the door, and he can go and close the door, right? Push the button, and he knows that that's a button to be pushed. But some simple direction really help us understand that his brain is developing how the world works, how his daily activities unfold in the environment naturally, and that he is attending to your words and then looking in the environment and say, oh, how do I translate that, and how do I put it in real time? And then he will put things in a container and take them out, and they'll do this over and over and over again. And around 6, 8 months old, they're into dumping, right? But by their first birthday, the flip side, or the whole process, is their understanding that I can put things in and then take it out, that this is bigger than this, and I can fill it all the way up with these blocks or widgets or whatever you're playing with. But it also builds how things are related to one another. It tells me that there's a curiosity of how much stuff can I put in this container, and that he is beginning to discriminate objects by how they feel and how they look. And again, that's healthy brain development, understanding. So when we talk about brain a lot, it's not intelligence per se or IQ, but it's really wiring enough knowledge through my experience that I understand how some of these things work, like the duster. He knows what you're going to do with the duster or the dustpan, right? Or a cup. Where does the cup go when it's dirty? In the sink. And so these conscious awareness of how people interact with their environment and how he can contribute. Again, that's just healthy knowledge, cognitive development for the brain. So here are a few tips. Give support and guidance to your toddler when he's playing, but let him do it. So if he's trying to figure out how to put all these puzzle pieces together, let him figure it out. And you can then sometimes guide his hand, say, oh, just turn it this way, and then it fits in. And then he has that motor experience and that success, and it feels good. And then he can do it closer and closer. And sometimes you have to guide a little bit more and guide a little bit more, and then slowly withdraw your guiding. right? And that as you notice your toddler gaining some skills and being able to do things on his own, then you can progressively reduce your support. And that's pretty much what I said, but that's what we call shaping. And what that means in a nutshell is that they will need your support. And the most common is, think about when your kid is first learning how to walk, right? They need our support to hold on to our leg or our hand or the furniture. And then slowly through a lot of practice and trial and error, they literally wire their brain to be able to do it more smoothly and guide themselves through whatever activity. And so that brings me to that myth that muscles, our legs or our arms, that we have muscle memory. And that's really not what's happening here. What's happening is that the memory is created by the experience, and the neurons are wiring in the brain, and you're making neural connections. And every time you're making neural connections, then you're creating a pathway. And the more you practice, so in the beginning, it'll take 10,000 neurons to fire together to learn how to put that puzzle piece in there. And then through literally hundreds of trials, then he will be able to do it smoothly, and it'll only require a few hundred, right? And so we call that neuroplasticity, that neurons that fire together, wire together. And so then less firing power is needed because that neural pathway is grooved in. Think of it as if you're walking between your neighbor's house and your house through the woods, or if there's wooded bushes or whatever. And the more you walk back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, the more you create a natural path. And that's what happens with all of his experiential learning and all of his social communication, that you're wiring these pathways, and that's the firing. That's the automaticity, right? It's not being able to run up the stairs fluently because his muscles have memory in his legs. It's because he has coordinated lower motor neurons, and his right side and his left side of his hemispheres are able to fire together smoothly and efficiently, that he can run up those stairs without falling or tripping. And I'm not talking about a 1-year-old running upstairs, but I'm talking about a 1-year-old practicing going upstairs with your support and your guidance, so that 3-year-old or 4-year-old can then smoothly run up and down those stairs independently without crashing and burning. And although kids do fall up and down stairs all the time, you know that. So do I. Anyways, the next section, the next developmental category would be looking at movement and physical milestones. And think both the gross motor skills and the fine motor skills within his or her environment. And it's about exploration. It's about building these motor coordination, strength and stability, and being able to become more and more fluid with their skill sets. So a 1-year-old, as many of you already know, because it's the first words and the first steps, but they can take several first steps unsupported, independently, and that they can move from a sitting position and stand up, pull up to stand, and then walk. And that fluency of moving from one body position to another is getting better and better and better. And they're, as you know, are gaining independence practically every day. They also can physically pull to a stand using the furniture, and they can scoot around more and more independently. And even though a 1-year-old or a 10-month-old can walk independently, they're still unstable on their feet. And a lot of that has to do with that their feet are still growing and maturing and understanding how to give information all the way up to the brain and then back down to the feet again, and make those body adjustments without stumbling and falling. But we're really looking at bilateral coordination, the right side of the body and the left side. That's why crawling is so important, looking at upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons, coordinating and alternating things, being able to cross midline and reach across your body and open the door or grab an object that they're interested in. And it's looking at the strength, the stability in their motor skills, and then that disassociation that I talk a lot about in baby-led weaning and early speech, right? Being able to stabilize your torso and move your limbs, be able to stabilize your jaw and move your lip, and then stabilize your lips and move your tongue. But that strength, disassociation, stability, coordination is really developing with the gross motor skills and the fine motor skills. But by 1 year of age, they're really transitioning into physical stability or physical independence. Some tips are trying to place your toddler in different environments, that the home environment with just maybe a flat tile floor or smooth carpet, and then outside, right, in the sand, in the grass, and being able to feel the ground beneath them and be able to adjust their ability to move in physical space. And it's really important that you give them plenty of opportunity to be barefoot inside the house and outside the house. And I've mentioned this before, but it's part of this modern day world that we struggle with is, that we're covering our kids up a lot, right? We're restricting that freedom of movement with big, heavy, thick-soled shoes or big, heavy clothing, and that they need to feel their body in space and be able to manipulate it in real time. And it's really important that we think about giving those opportunities. Again, always be safe. If you don't know the environment, of course, cover up their feet. But if it's your own backyard or your friend's yard or out in the sandbox, then please, please give them that opportunity to strengthen that and to build that communication system from their feet all the way up their body to their brain. Some other tips would be also recognizing that you can support them in new walking and new managing, especially up and down stairs. That's a key one. But then to slowly but surely back away and let them figure it out on their own. And there's that 80-20 rule where 80% of the time there's a lot of repetition, that they're wiring their brains so they become more and more efficient, and the automaticity in, say, think about learning how to play the piano. You think about each and every key, and then with, thousands of hours of practice, you become much more fluent and make music, right? And that's the same with walking and tying your shoes and eating and speech, that you become more and more fluid in those neurons wiring and firing together. But at the same time, needs to be novel. You need to change it up. And that's why playing outside in the grass or in the sandbox or in different environments, even walking on some bricks or some stones, helps them build and challenge themselves and build new processing systems and create better balance and better communication with the upper and lower systems and the right and left hemispheres. And so we need 20% of varied or novel or new or challenging, and then 80% to reinforce and build smoothness into it. Okay, so the next section would be food and nutrition. And so meal times by their first birthday should be pretty fun. They're still a little messy and they're still learning the skills behind self-feeding and all of that. But I'm hoping that you all gave them 6 months of opportunity of exploring foods and meals, and that you've taken the opportunity to take full advantage of the flavor window and their ability to practice a wide variety of foods, because they're curious and they don't really know yet the control that food can or can't have. And they're still really at that exploration phase, right? But that you're looking at a variety of cooked flavorful meats, some cooked vegetables, some soft fruits, 100 foods by their first birthday. So recognize that the teething, and I've shared this in the past, the teething will emerge based on their experience with biting hard things, hard and soft things, but a variety of densities, from your teethers or your chew toys to some good, well-cooked steak bones to nice roasted, partially crunchy broccoli to meat. And of course, you're going to give them some pureed foods, some creamy foods, but it's all about a variety of flavors, textures, and densities. And so the teeth begin to really emerge. The lower jaw typically will emerge before the upper jaw, somewhere around that 6th or 8th month. And then the central incisors and lateral incisors, so those are the teeth in the front. And then even the first molars by their first birthday. So you're going to see, hopefully, a lot of teeth emerging, and they're going to have, again, a different experience in their mouth because you've given them that chance to do a lot of exploration with food and chewing and biting and learning. They also, are fairly independent, that you can sit down and share a meal with them. They're still refining their table manners, of course, but they have enough experience to bite on something, to chew it with their lips closed, to sequence that they breathe through their nose as they're chewing. They still aren't going to have a full adult rotary grind chew, but they're going to be able to chew it pretty maturely in their mouth, and that the swallow pattern has matured. And that's the key, that shift, because of that 6 months of practice, from 6 months to 12 months of age, that they have a mature swallow where the tongue tip elevates to behind your upper teeth, and that the lateral margins of the tongue then seal it off, and there's this wave-like swallow pattern, a mature wave, and so the tongue is not thrusting forwards. You shouldn't see a lot of food coming out of their mouth. It's a really kind of clean swallow. It's not 100% mature. That'll be closer to their second birthday, where they have the rotary grind chew and they can close their lips and chew and rotate and gather. And as I said earlier, they should really be comfortable in drinking from an open cup, and their mouth cavity opening is still pretty small. So drinking from an adult cup is going to be trickier, because that's going to hit the corners of their mouth, and that's going to be too much information for them. And so they really need a smaller cup where they can hold it between their lips, not bite down on it with their teeth or firmly, but that they can do that sipping repetitive. They can sip probably 3 or 4 sips in a row, because they have that fine motor dance and a mature, clean swallow. And it's a lot that has to do with a swallow, that the tongue knows what to do, of elevating the tip, sealing the sides, and then having that wave. And that's really important, that you've been practicing that for 6 months. So by their first birthday, you should be seeing a pretty independent eater. Not 100%, still kind of messy, can still be picky from time to time, and you know that, but there's steady progress. And let's see, some tips that I will love to share with parents is, by the time they're reaching that first birthday, that you're really giving your toddler 3 solid meals. And so what that means is, again, you're giving them 6 months of practice. You're slowly lining up or aligning how much solid foods they're taking mixed in with their breast milk or their bottle formula. It should take about 20 minutes for each meal. You should be sharing these meals with them. Be a good role model, build that social communication. It will ebb and flow. Sometimes they'll be more hungry and less hungry. You just continue measuring how much he ate. The more that you're giving them as routines, meaning that you have your 3 meals and maybe a nice healthy nutrition snack because they can't eat a lot in one setting. They don't have the stomach for it. They don't have the digestion system for it. They don't even have the wherewithal to sit there and eat a slow, deliberate 3-course meal. But you're going to give them time to find that rhythm of when they're full and when they're hungry. And it's really important during those first 6 months, 18 months, 2 years of helping them walk into this mealtime and feeding, so they begin to become aware of when they're full and when they're hungry. And that it's really important that we call it the growth time. So if they finish their meal after 20 minutes, then they have 2 to 2.5 hour window to digest and build that nutrition, right? To use it. And then get hungry again. But if they have access to food 24/7, they'll never feel hungry and they won't know what it's like to sit down and eat a meal from the beginning to end and feel satisfied, right? And so I talk a lot about this in my baby-led weaning, and it's really, really important that we help them. And so by the time they hit that first birthday, they've had a lot of opportunities, and that you're really helping them understand from a sensory level of what it feels like to be hungry and full. And sometimes I just don't feel like eating, and that's okay too, right? So you might want to take a look at episodes 39, 40, and 41, where I walk you through the 15 strategies of introducing solids so that you begin to raise an adventurous eater. So take a look at that. Some families choose to continue to breastfeed, and I get that. That's totally fine. That's a personal choice. Look at the calories, look at that. Is it still because of bonding? It doesn't have to be because of calories or nutritional needs. But if you want to continue for another 4, 6, 8 months, then I think that's great, because it's the perfect food for your baby, for his brain and for his growth and development. But begin to be very, very conscious about lining up nap time and sleep time and feeding time. If you still want them to nurse, then that becomes the supplement, and you give that to them after they've eaten their solid meals. And be patient with yourself. Understand that it's an ebb and flow, that it's a dance, and that he's learning and you're learning how to do this. And you're always present with them, and that it's not rushed. And yes, there's going to be days that are more rushed, but we want to be mindful. We want to be present. And I talk a lot about this, to learn how to chew, to learn how to socialize and engage, and then to build a healthy relationship with food in and of itself. So when we look at the developmental milestones by their first birthday, and that window, again, from 9 months of age to 15 months of age. And that's a window, right, where all of these things that I talk about here, from social emotional development, language and communication, the brain development, how we're wiring the brain and building neural pathways, movement and physical development, and then food and nutrition. That those 5 main categories, that's what I take a big look at. That there aren't absolutes, and that most kids develop in the same sequence. And so as a therapist for 35 years, that's what I've always looked at. That some kids can be delayed, that they're a little behind the window, right? Or the developmental markers, but they're still following the sequential pattern, and that's key. But perhaps they're just not doing it at the same rate. The key takeaway here is that we don't want them to skip over these developmental milestones, because then that's something that we call as splinter skills. So say they just crawl for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden, because of your family and because of who he is, and everybody's misread one another, now he's walking early, right? And so that doesn't mean that that's better for them. Earlier is not necessarily better. And that we as grown-ups, I think, often misinterpret the desire to walk. So he might be pulling to stand a lot and pulling to stand, and then you go ahead and take their hands and help them walk independently or help them walk across the room. That is not letting him figure out his time clock, right? And his developmental milestones. So if he's pulling to stand at, 9 months or 10 months, let him figure it out. Don't necessarily take him by the hand and build that walking skill because he really needs a couple more months of crawling. And I know that's really hard for parents to wrap their minds around sometimes, but earlier is not always in his best interest. And so be mindful that by the time your child hits that first birthday, that they've had a lot of these milestones exposure, right? And that because of the good hours upon hours upon hours of tummy time and crawling, then by the time they hit that first birthday, they're ready to really pull to a stand and walk on their own. And we will support them, say, through unstable ground or unsure footing, but we won't necessarily push them to that next developmental milestone. They have to really figure it out and wire the brain through that 80-20 rule, right? 80% really practicing over and over and over again and building efficiency and fluency, and 20% where they do stumble and fall, whether it's, gagging a little bit on food. Oops, I put too much in at one time and I better not do that. Or exposing different food onto that gag reflex. And so we can desensitize the gag reflex, which is there to protect us, and it begins to migrate further and further back into the oral cavity. And so by the time they hit that first birthday, it's really the last third of the mouth back inside, again, to protect us, right? If we've laughed or put too much food at the same time that we're trying to eat and we have miscalculated that, then that gag is there to protect us. It's not at 3 months, 4 months, 6 months of age so far anterior and close to the lips or to the tip part of your tongue. And so through that experience, we've desensitized and it's matured and it's not so hyper gag, right? And so some of the things to look for at their first birthday, give or take a month, that they're not crawling at all. That's really, really important. I can't tell you how many families over the years have come and said, oh no, they're not much of a crawler. They just started running and walking. And I'm like, okay, that's a huge developmental milestone that gives the brain a lot of practice, a lot of wiring opportunities. So we do know that that will often place kids in different risk groups. Not always, but it just puts them in a different category for perhaps writing or reading issues or attention problems or sequencing problems. It's not a one-to-one direct correlation, but it puts them in a different category. So if your 1-year-old isn't interested in like hide and seek kinds of things and searching for objects, that they don't find that interesting or curious, right? That they don't play with you in that hidden object activities. That's kind of important to take a look at. Why aren't they building curiosity? Is it because you haven't given them opportunity to practice and spark interest? Or is it that they haven't mastered the whole object permanence kind of thing, right? It's out of sight, out of mind. I'll just move my attention elsewhere. Where is that developmental process? or that your 1-year-old is unable to stand without support. So they might not be a fluent walker, right? That the gait still might be a little unstable, but can they stand there and take a step or two in one direction or another? They might stumble and fall on their bum. That's okay. They're only yay big, so it's not a big deal. But that they have enough physical strength and torso stability that they can hold themselves upright. And that's really important. That your 1-year-old isn't pointing. And that's important because it's a shared joint attention task, right? And that he's interested in what you're saying and that he's able to have some fine visual and motor integration where he can find something on the page and point to the sled or point to the giraffe. But if he's not doing that by his first birthday, then we need to take a look at that sensory processing, that visual and motor
and auditory
integration. The other thing to take a close look at by the time they hit that first birthday, that he doesn't say simple words other than mama and dada. That's a common question that all of us speech people will say. What was his first words besides mama and dada? Whether it was cat or cup or drink or water. And it can be, all of these can be approximated, right? Kiki for kitty cat, or wah wah for water, or up for cup. At 12 months of age, all of that are true words as long as he's saying them over and over again. It's important to understand that your child at 12 months of age is beginning to connect, that your verbal output is a representation for an object. And so it's a symbol, just like the written word is a symbol, right, for a cup. But my verbal output is also a symbol for objects or actions or feelings, right, or needs or wants or desires. And so it's really important that we validate that a 1-year-old is beginning to put that concept together. So we're building the brain processing system physiologically through experience, but that also the meaning, the understanding behind it is critical by that first birthday. And the other big vital component that we need to look out for is that she doesn't lose skills once she's gained them. So the big hallmark for autism, many parents will say, is that they started talking in single words and labeling things and requesting things, and then they stopped. And that's key. And so if you notice that at 12 months or 14 months or 16 or 18 months, that's a big, huge red flag. Things will take a back seat sometimes when another big developmental marker is coming, like potty training, and that's key. But you don't lose those skills. They just kind of take a back seat, and they're still using the verbal communication. They're still playing and engaging with you, but they might not be exponentially growing because a lot of bandwidth is going into the potty training and the bathroom skills. So those are things to look out for that are really important. Milestones are critical, and we've gathered these for 80, 100 years. We know what a typical healthy range is for a 1-year-old. And so you're going to see different skills, right? But they're all, as I said, that they're developing in a sequential pattern, not necessarily at the same speed, right? So a 1-year-old, and I remember my pediatrician looking at me because my 1-year-old had 18 words, and I could probably list them out for you, but he looked at me and he's like, well, that's not typical. And I said, yes, it is. It's in the bell curve. She's just high average because her mother's a speech pathologist, right? And if she didn't have really good speech and language skills, I'd be saying, well, I'm not a very good speech pathologist, right? But the idea is that by their first birthday, that they have acquired enough motor skills, enough auditory skills, and enough social communication skills to want to use verbal communication to represent things on the outside, whether it's an object or a hug, right? Or up, 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 he wants to be picked up, or no bed, right? He doesn't want to go to bed. So those verbal outputs represent something in the outside world. So developmental milestones are key to helping us understand where they are, and because so many things are happening. I mean, you have a newborn who's pretty much a blob, right? And that's not very nice to say to your beautiful baby, but they're helpless 100%, except they have, by God's, beautiful gift, given some reflexes that they can survive, right? That they can root, find the nipple and take in some sustenance, or calm themselves when you bundle them, that they can relax, right? And that they have a biting reflex to help them to build some chewing skills in the next 3 months and 4 months and 8 months. By the time they're about 6 months of age, they're still pretty dependent. They're responsive and they're building connection, but they can't crawl yet. They're still just babbling sounds because it sounds good or it feels good. It makes you laugh. So I'm going to play with these vocal stuff, right? So they're moving from cooing into some babble, but it's not all that differential and it's not all that purposeful. But, by 9 months of age to 15 months, now he's walking and talking and listening and playing and repeating and asking and doing and following directions. That's huge. And so that's why this idea that developmental milestones they're too restrictive. They put kids in a box. I'm never one to put anybody in a box, but we need some kind of benchmark, some kind of measurement, some kind of understanding of what a typical, healthy, well-balanced 1-year-old looks like compared to someone who's struggling, who needs more support. For some reason, and that's the key there, we have to figure out the reason. Why isn't this 1-year-old able to pull to stand and take a couple of steps? Why isn't this 1-year-old interested in solid foods, not interested in sharing books with you? Why is this 1-year-old not interested in a lot of vocal play? Why does this 1-year-old not respond to his name? And so it's really, really, really important that we have these developmental milestones to understand and respect the sequence of development and continue to support them through that, letting them build the rate, right? We don't want to force them to run and walk before they've had months and months of practice of crawling. So understanding where to lay the attention and where to let them struggle that 20% of the time and figure it out and wire their brain so it becomes more and more efficient and fluid. So that's the key. Here's the takeaways. The more present you are, the more you understand your child and understand where they are, where they're struggling, where you need to step back and let them figure it out, and where you need to support them more. And that the stronger your relationship in understanding each other, then you can measure progress or measure problems, right? In either direction. It's about being present. And that slow is usually always better than fast. So let them take their time at learning how to walk up the step over and over and over again. And I remember that with my daughter, that there was this threshold that was maybe 3-4 inches from our porch, our outside porch at our summer cottage, to the kitchen. And she just practiced going up and down that one step in every which way, on her bum, crawling, walking, standing, forward, backwards, over and over and over again, day after day. But that was her way of navigating and learning how to really master those steps in general. So let your toddler linger and practice as much as they need to, right, at their own rate. And then they will push themselves to the next level at their own rate. That tummy time leads to crawling, and crawling leads to walking, right? And that cooing leads to babbling, and babbling leads to real words, and single words lead to sentences. It's a process. And that exploratory play, practice, getting messy really is the key. Getting messy in your hands, in your mouth, in your body, and navigating this world that shouldn't always be pristine, right? That they need opportunity to stretch, get frustrated. They also need opportunity to be bored and quiet and self-reflective, right? And so give them that wide span of social environments, and they will thrive because you know what you're doing. Let's take a look at the developmental milestones for a 2-year-old in next week's episode. And be ready, because 2-year-olds are a blast.